Nobody talks about the toilets. I have spent 3 years researching buried infrastructure, examining photographs from excavations across Europe and America, documenting depths and dates and features. Everyone focuses on the bridges. Everyone discusses the buried buildings. But nobody mentions the bathrooms. Sophisticated sanitation systems sealed in mud, meters below modern street level, featuring technology that should not have existed when those depths were supposedly ground level. Porcelain fixtures, mechanical flush mechanisms, drainage networks connecting to pipes that lead nowhere because the rivers they once fed have been buried too. The toilets are proof, and nobody wants to discuss them. The photographs came from a construction site in Vienna. Workers digging a new tunnel had broken through into something unexpected. A bathroom. Not a primitive latrine or a simple chamber pot arrangement, but a fully equipped bathroom with porcelain fixtures, glazed tile walls, and a drainage system that connected to pipes leading deeper underground. The room sat 4 meters below the current street level. According to official history, bathrooms like this should not have existed when that depth was supposedly ground level. The pipes were ceramic, perfectly cylindrical, fitted together with precision that modern plumbers would recognize. The toilet itself featured a water reservoir and a mechanical flush mechanism. This was not medieval. This was not even early industrial. This was something else entirely. I started collecting similar accounts. They were everywhere once I knew what to look for. Paris, London, Prague, St. Petersburg, city after city. The same story repeated. Construction crews breaking ground for modern infrastructure and discovering sophisticated sanitation systems buried meters below the surface. Systems that predated the official invention of indoor plumbing by decades, sometimes centuries. The depths were consistent: 3 meters, 4 meters, sometimes as much as 6 meters of accumulated earth covering bathroom facilities that should not exist. We are told that indoor plumbing was a Victorian innovation. The history books credit specific inventors with specific patents at specific dates. Thomas Crapper and his flush toilet in the 1880s. The gradual adoption of water closets throughout the late 19th century. A clear progression from chamber pots to outhouses to the modern bathroom we know today. But the photographs from excavation sites tell a different story. They show bathroom fixtures emerging from the mud that look identical to what Victorian engineers supposedly invented. Except these fixtures are buried beneath Victorian street levels. They predate the streets themselves. In London, excavations for the underground in the 1860s repeatedly encountered what workers called Roman baths. But the locations made no sense for Roman construction. The architectural style did not match Roman examples from elsewhere, and the plumbing technology was too advanced. Pressure-regulated water flow, ventilation systems to prevent sewer gas buildup, drainage gradients calculated with mathematical precision. The workers did not know what they had found, so they called it Roman because that was the only framework they had for explaining advanced ancient infrastructure. Historians accepted this explanation without question. It became the official story. Nobody asked why Romans would build elaborate bathroom facilities in locations they never occupied. The materials themselves raise questions that nobody wants to answer. Porcelain requires firing at temperatures exceeding 1200 degrees Celsius. It requires specific clay compositions and glazing techniques that we are told were not available until industrial kilns made them possible. Yet here was porcelain, buried in mud, predating the factories that supposedly first produced it. The pipes showed no signs of primitive manufacturing. No hammer marks, no uneven surfaces, no variations that would indicate handcrafting. They looked machine-made. They looked mass-produced. They looked like products of an industrial civilization that officially did not exist. I found a newspaper account from Boston, dated 1887. Workers excavating for a new building foundation had discovered an intact bathroom chamber 5 meters below street level. The article described their confusion. The room contained what the reporter called modern conveniences, including a flushing water closet, a sink with separate taps for hot and cold water, and a bathtub with drainage connected to a larger pipe system below. The foreman was quoted as saying he had never seen anything like it. The pipes, he noted, went down further than they could dig. They connected to something deeper, something they never found. The pattern was unmistakable. This was not happening in one city or one region. It was global. Every major urban center I researched showed the same evidence. Buried sanitation infrastructure too sophisticated for its supposed era, too deep to match the official timeline, too widespread to be coincidental. And everywhere, the same response. Confusion from the workers who found it. Brief mentions in local newspapers. Then silence. No follow-up investigations, no academic papers examining the implications. Just quiet acceptance that these things existed, and equally quiet agreement never to discuss what they meant. Think about it. How do you manufacture porcelain without industrial kilns? How do you calculate drainage gradients without surveying equipment? How do you create pressure-regulated plumbing systems without understanding fluid dynamics at a mathematical level? The official story does not account for any of this. We are told that humanity slowly developed these technologies over centuries of trial and error. But the buried evidence suggests something different. It suggests that someone, somewhere, already knew how to do all of this. And then they were buried. In Chicago, after the Great Fire of 1871, construction crews rebuilding the city kept finding the same thing. Bathroom facilities beneath the rubble, beneath the old foundations, beneath everything. The reports describe workers breaking through floors and discovering complete plumbing networks that connected to nothing. Pipes that led to rivers that no longer flowed there. Drains that emptied into channels that had been filled with mud. The infrastructure was already ancient when Chicago supposedly was founded. It was waiting there, beneath the prairie, sealed in sediment, forgotten. Savran, St. Petersburg tells the same story. The city was supposedly founded in 1703, built from nothing in a swamp by Peter the Great. We are taught about the incredible effort required to construct a capital where none had existed. Thousands of workers dying to create something from scratch in an inhospitable wasteland. But beneath the grand palaces and government buildings, excavators have found complete sanitation networks that do not match this narrative. Plumbing systems of a sophistication that rivals modern construction. Bathrooms with running water, with drainage, with ventilation shafts that connected to the surface through channels now filled with mud. These systems sit meters below the Petrine foundations. They predate the city that supposedly was the first thing ever built there. The official explanation strains credibility. We are told that Peter imported European expertise, that he brought engineers from Holland and craftsmen from across the continent. But the buried infrastructure does not match Dutch designs or any other European style from that period. It matches the buried systems found in Vienna, in London, in Boston. The same pipe diameters, the same fitting techniques, the same ceramic glazing, as if all of it came from the same manufacturing tradition, as if all of it was built by the same civilization. I found records of excavations in Prague from the 1890s. Workers expanding the city's sewer system encountered what they described as an older network beneath their own. The pipes were larger, better constructed, made from materials they did not recognize. The drainage calculations were more precise than anything their own engineers had designed. The Czech workers documented their findings carefully. They measured the depths. They photographed the junctions. They noted that the old system connected to channels leading toward the river, except those channels were completely filled with hardened sediment. The water had stopped flowing long ago. Something had filled the pipes with mud and sealed them shut. Think about what that means. Water does not stop flowing through pipes on its own. Rivers do not politely fill themselves with sediment and disappear. Drainage systems do not gradually accumulate mud while continuing to function. Something catastrophic happened. Something sudden. Something that deposited enough material to bury an entire sanitation network while simultaneously cutting off the water supply that fed it. The pipes in Prague were not clogged with centuries of buildup. They were sealed, preserved, frozen in time by a single, overwhelming event. The engineering questions multiply the more you examine the evidence. These buried systems feature pressure regulation mechanisms that require precise mathematical calculations. They show evidence of standardized manufacturing, pipes of identical diameter produced in quantities that suggest industrial capacity. The joints between sections used techniques that prevent leakage through expansion and contraction across temperature changes. Someone understood material science. Someone understood fluid dynamics. Someone had access to manufacturing infrastructure capable of producing thousands of identical components. We are told that this knowledge developed gradually through the Industrial Revolution. That trial and error over decades produced the plumbing systems we know today. But the buried evidence predates the Industrial Revolution. The factories that supposedly invented these techniques were built on top of infrastructure that already used them. The inventors we credit with these innovations were digging up their own inventions from beneath their feet. In Philadelphia, construction records from the 1880s describe repeated encounters with what workers called the old pipes. Nobody knew who had laid them. Nobody knew where they led. The pipes were made from a ceramic compound that the city's engineers could not identify. When they tried to connect their new sewer lines to the existing infrastructure, they found that the old system was more sophisticated than their own. The gradients were better calculated. The capacity was higher. The connections were more secure. They ended up routing their modern pipes around the ancient ones because they could not improve upon what was already there. The material analysis from these discoveries raises questions that historians refuse to address. Chemical composition testing of buried fixtures shows glazing compounds that require specific mineral combinations and precise temperature control. Metallurgical examination of brass fittings reveals alloys that should not have been possible without industrial refining processes. The mortar sealing pipe joints contains additives that prevent bacterial growth, a technique we are told was not developed until the 20th century. Every piece of evidence points to the same conclusion. This was not primitive technology. This was not early experimentation. This was advanced infrastructure from a civilization that understood sanitation at a level we only recently relearned. What could cause such complete burial? The official explanation is mundane. Cities accumulate debris over time. Streets are raised for drainage. Buildings are demolished and rebuilt on top of old foundations. Centuries of gradual accumulation slowly raise the ground level. It sounds reasonable until you do the math. We are talking about 3 meters, 4 meters, sometimes 6 meters of material. That is not centuries of garbage and construction waste. That is not gradual accumulation. That is catastrophic deposition. That is a flood of mud so massive, it buried entire plumbing networks in a single event and sealed them so completely they remained intact for generations. The mud flood hypothesis explains what gradual accumulation cannot. a worldwide catastrophe that deposited meters of sediment across every continent simultaneously. The same event that buried the bridges, the same event that raised street levels in every major city, the same event that forced survivors to build on top of what came before rather than excavating what was lost. The toilets were not gradually covered over centuries. They were buried all at once. The precision of their preservation proves it. Gradual burial would show decay, collapse, deterioration. But these bathrooms emerged from the mud intact, their fixtures still attached, their pipes still connected, as if the water stopped flowing one day and never returned. If they buried the evidence of advanced sanitation, they buried the evidence of advanced civilization. Toilets are not decorative. They are not optional. They are the foundation of urban life. You cannot have dense populations without waste management. You cannot have public health without drainage. You cannot have the cities we see in old photographs without the infrastructure to support them. And that infrastructure was already there, already buried, already forgotten by the time the official history begins. The suppression makes sense when you understand what sanitation represents. Indoor plumbing is proof of civilization. It requires manufacturing capability, engineering knowledge, urban planning, and organized labor. It requires a society sophisticated enough to invest in invisible infrastructure that benefits everyone. When you find buried toilets beneath a city that supposedly did not exist yet, you are not just finding old pipes. You are finding proof that the official timeline is wrong. Proof that someone was there before. Proof that they were more advanced than we have been told. I started looking at patent records differently. The inventors we credit with creating modern plumbing were not working in isolation. They were excavating. They were studying what they found beneath their cities. They were reverse engineering technology that already existed and presenting it as new discovery. The patents describe innovations that match exactly what workers were pulling from the mud during the same decades. The flush mechanisms, the pressure regulators, the drainage calculations, all of it supposedly invented in laboratories and workshops. All of it already buried beneath the streets outside. The timeline contradictions are everywhere once you look. Buildings constructed in the 1850s with basement bathrooms at depths that predate the buildings by centuries. Plumbing connections that lead to sewer systems that officially were not built until decades later. Water supply pipes that connect to reservoirs that no longer exist because they were filled with sediment during whatever catastrophe buried everything else. The evidence does not fit the story we have been given. It fits a different story entirely. Think about what we are told about human progress. The steady march from primitive to modern. The gradual development of technology over millennia. The slow accumulation of knowledge that brought us from caves to cities. But what if that narrative is wrong? What if we are not advancing? What if we are recovering? What if the Renaissance was not a rebirth of ancient knowledge from books, but a desperate scramble to understand technology that was being dug up from the mud? What if every innovation of the past few centuries has been rediscovery rather than discovery? The toilets suggest exactly this. They show a level of sophistication that we are told did not exist until recently. They demonstrate manufacturing capability and engineering knowledge that supposedly developed gradually over centuries but appears fully formed in the buried record. They prove that someone understood sanitation before the official inventors were born. And then that someone disappeared, buried along with their bathrooms, erased from history so completely that we credit their achievements to people who came later. I walk through old cities now, and I see them differently. I notice the basement windows at ankle level. I see the doors accessed by descending stairs. I observe how old churches sit in depressions while modern streets rise around them. And I think about what is beneath my feet. Complete bathroom facilities preserved in mud. Pipe networks that once carried clean water and removed waste. An entire sanitation infrastructure that supported a population we have been taught never existed. The evidence is there. Buried, but not destroyed. Hidden, but not gone. The implications keep me awake at night. If an advanced civilization could be buried and forgotten, if their toilets could be sealed beneath meters of mud and their achievements credited to later inventors, what else has been hidden? What other technologies did they possess that we are only now rediscovering? What other evidence lies beneath our streets, waiting for construction crews to break through and find it? And most disturbing of all, what happened to them? What kind of catastrophe could bury an entire world's infrastructure in a single event and leave so few survivors that within a few generations the previous civilization was completely forgotten? The mud flood answers these questions in ways that official history cannot. A global catastrophe that deposited sediment across every continent simultaneously. An event so overwhelming that it buried cities whole and forced survivors to build on top of ruins they could not excavate. A reset so complete that the previous civilization became legend, then myth, then nothing at all. The toilets are evidence of what came before. They are proof that the world was different. They are silent witnesses to a catastrophe we are not supposed to remember. And here is what truly disturbs me. If it happened once, it can happen again. Everything we have built, every bathroom and pipe and drainage system, every piece of infrastructure we take for granted could disappear beneath the mud tomorrow. We assume permanence. We believe our civilization is stable. We trust that progress only moves forward. But the buried toilets prove otherwise. They prove that advanced societies can be destroyed and forgotten. They prove that everything we know can be erased. The toilets are still there, beneath Vienna and London and Boston and Prague. Beneath every old city where construction crews occasionally break through and find what they cannot explain. Sealed in mud, preserved in sediment. Waiting for someone to dig down far enough and ask the right questions. The official history ignores them. The academic establishment dismisses them. But they remain. Silent proof of a world that was buried and a truth that someone decided we should never know. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The toilets remember. And now, so do you.